Welcome everyone to Zoom into Books today. We are talking with multi-award-winning author Lisa McCombs about her new book, The Day Ted Williams Came to Town. This is the third book in her Church of Ghosts series for young adults. Welcome, Lisa, to Zoom into Books.
Thank you, Kathy. It's good to be here.
Well, this is a wonderful series of books, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on Facebook and in the Zoom room. And we have some really good news for Lisa today that she doesn't know about.
Oh, what?
Lisa, this morning we found out that The Day Ted Williams Came to Town won a Gold Mom's Choice Award.
Oh my gosh.
So congratulations.
Thank you. I was just reading about Dreama's book. It's like, oh my gosh, thank you, thank you, thank you.
So let's have you start by maybe giving the background of the Church of Ghosts series and how this idea came about for you.
Sure, I'd like to do that. My Church of Ghosts series was not planned. It just kind of popped out of nowhere. Back in 2017, I was sitting in church one day and the minister, Pastor Larry, was telling a story about his early days of ministering. He is from McDowell County, West Virginia, and he was driving around McDowell County, looking around, and he started telling this story, and I want to read the story that he gave me. He says, there was a church of God that I had driven past numerous times, but one time there was something different about the sign. The capital D from the word God had fallen down. As I'm driving home, sermon ideas began to run through my mind. Church of Go? This is exactly what the big C in church should exemplify. Big C, meaning not just one singular church or denomination. What are we doing with going outside the walls and doors of the church? The Church of Go will go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Great Commission Jesus gave was not for the church to be a building, but a movement of love sending us on the go. And I kept thinking of his story on the way home from church that day, and I thought, oh man, this is so cool. And as a retired teacher of young adults, I thought this is something we need. We need our young adults to know more about this movement. We need to be on the go. And so I was sitting at home thinking, how can I implement this in my writing, when my son all of a sudden out of nowhere said, Mom, I just discovered this new phone app. It's the Theater P app. I was like, Theater P? Really? And what it was about was you can actually be sitting in a cinema watching a movie and get on this app and find out if you're going to miss anything if you go to the bathroom to pee. And I thought, this is crazy. But all of a sudden, the story started coming alive. And I realized then that Church of Go has to be about stories. Stories that we tell one another, stories that we hear when we're young. And I just started writing this story, and this is in Bombs Bursting in Air. This is the first book in the Church of Go series. Let me just read a little bit of chapter 1. Theater P is the name of chapter 1. If one more bomb sounds, I thought, my bladder is going to burst. Dad! Even in my stage whisper, I heard my voice carry throughout the cinema. Dad was engrossed in the action on the screen and obviously mistook my plea as part of the movie script. Dad, I have to go. Shh. The hisses from the seats behind us sounded more angry than annoyed, or annoyed than angry, but I still felt guilty. No one liked to waste good money on their entertainment to be interrupted by someone who couldn't keep their mouth shut and their bladder under control. And at that point, Bombs Bursting in Air came alive. This is a story about a young girl who is suffering PTSD after a horrible event in chapter 1 that I'm not going to give away, Kathy. But because you tell me all the time I give it away. But America, our main character here, suffers from PTSD. And with the help of her pastor, Larry, totally unrelated to my pastor, Larry, and the Church of Go, she overcomes this situation. These books are not preachy, but they're good, clean stories. And it's all about the story, right? It's all about the story. So I wrote Bombs Bursting in Air, and it gained some popular attention, for which I'm glad. But it also spurred me on to write another Church of Go book. And that's when the series began. The idea unfolded. And the second book is Praise Petals, about 7 young girls that Pastor Larry recruits to be in an all-girl praise team at the Church of Go, Sacred Sanctuary, Church of Go. These 7 girls are totally different in personality, in family life. Some of them don't like one another. Some of them like one another a lot. But it is a good, healthy story about how young girls relate to one another in this day and age. And that's Praise Petals. And that leads me to the book of the day Ted Williams came to town. And this is very timely right now, because if you know anything about Major League Baseball, you will know that Ted Williams was a famous Boston Red Sox baseball player. And as far as I'm concerned, he is the GOAT of baseball, greatest of all times. And there's nothing more American than baseball. So I needed to write this story more because my dad used to tell me a story about the day that the famous Ted Williams came to his hometown. And once again, it's all about the story. Kids need stories. But my dad used to tell a story, still does. If you ask him today, he'll tell it all over again and again and again. That he remembers sitting in the Universal Dry Cleaners, which was his father's place of business, and he overheard that this place was like a hub for all the area men to sit around and gossip, because they really do gossip. And he overheard someone saying that Tom Yawkey was coming to town. Tom Yawkey was a businessman who owned a place in Boone County, West Virginia called the Yawkey Freeman Land Company. But Tom Yawkey would come back to Madison, West Virginia and go grouse hunting with all of the town men, the prominent men there, the undertaker, the high school principal, the dentist, the town doctor. He would come back and he would go hunting with them. And my dad remembers sitting in the Universal Dry Cleaners, sitting in a corner. He was about 8 years old, overhearing his father and his grandfather talking about Tom Yawkey coming soon back to Madison, West Virginia to go grouse hunting. And my dad was like, oh, wow, okay, maybe they'll let me go. And then he heard the big news. And I call this the TWN, the Ted Williams moment. You know, that first kiss, the big news, the big event in your life. But he heard that Ted Williams was coming with Tom Yawkey because Tom Yawkey owned the Boston Red Sox. So my dad was just thrilled. He was like, I've got to find a way to be in on this. But he was only 8 years old. But that's what inspired this story, the day Ted Williams came to town, because everybody has a TWN, a Ted Williams moment, that big event. And the day that Ted Williams came to town really isn't a bit about the baseball player Ted Williams. It's about my main character, whose name is Ted Williams, because he's named after, of course, this baseball player from the 1940s. And the whole story is about young Ted Williams coming to a place called Ellison, West Virginia, which is where all of my Church of Go books are set. These are standalone books, but everything takes place in Ellison, West Virginia, and revolves around the Church of Go and Pastor Larry, who, by the way, is unlike my Pastor Larry, because my Pastor Larry is short and bald, and the Pastor Larry in the books is tall with a long black braid, and he drives a Harley Davidson motorcycle. Let me get back to the story. Our Ted Williams in The Day Ted Williams Came to Town is an upcoming senior in high school when he gets in trouble with his best friend. At that time, Ted and his parents lived in Pittsburgh, and he loved the city life. His best friend Randall is bad to the bone. He ends up in prison. He and Ted get involved in a situation where they get arrested. And Ted's parents don't think that they need to be there any longer. They need to get their son to a more wholesome environment. Fortunately, Ted's dad had just inherited his grandparents' house in Ellison, West Virginia. So while Ted's dad is abroad working, Ted and his mom moved to Ellison. And I'll read a little bit about this. The first night, or the second night, that Ted and his mom are in Ellison by themselves, Ted discovers that he has a mysterious being in his attic bedroom. So I will read this to you. I think I'm going to hit the hay, honey. Maybe we'll go shopping tomorrow. Patsy, that's Ted's mom, failed in hiding the yawn that monopolized her entire face, causing Ted to answer the contagious action. He was really tired. The adventure walking around the mall today and the visit with Pastor Hawkins had pretty much worn him out. Then all the laughter that shared with his mother brought on conflicting feelings he was almost ashamed of being a turncoat and actually enjoying time with his mom. That was a silent rule he and Randall had agreed upon. Parents are the enemy and not to be trusted. Above all, do not have fun with parents. But Ted knew he hadn't always felt that way. It was confusing to him how that had all changed. When had he stopped enjoying his parents' company? His mother was actually a cool person, and he really wanted to trust her. She'd been there for him when all that bad stuff was going on with Randall, and she seemed to be there for him now. If it was just he and his mother, life would be good. It was when his dad was around that things got funky. I wish Dad would never come home, he said in his empty attic room, and rage overcame him. Without even thinking, Ted began chanting, "Don't come home, don't come home, don't come home." He pounded his hands on the bed mattress to emphasize his point. His head kept time with his hands on the bed. He pounded and pounded until the silence offered by the muffling of the heavy mattress actually roared in his ears, and his head spun from the repetitive banging. With tears trickling down his cheeks, Ted recalled each time his father had turned his back to his ear, the time his father was too busy to attend his one and only piano recital, when work took him away during his second birthday party, the many Christmas and birthday presents his mother never received because his father either forgot or didn't feel it necessary for Ted to give his own gift to present to her. And the time his father blamed his mother for Ted's one and only bicycle wreck that landed him in the emergency room to receive 7 stitches. When his mother had tried to explain that she'd only turned her back for a second, his father had flown into a fit of reasons why Ted didn't deserve a bike. And she had no business allowing her son to be responsible enough to take the bike out on his own. And then his father had taken the bike, and Ted had never seen it again. And now they were here in God-forsaken Ellison, West Virginia. And his father was on the road again, a lifetime away. Bobby Williams hadn't even thought to include Ted in his plans to pick up and move his family right before Ted's senior year of high school. Not once had he asked Ted's opinion, not once. When exhaustion replaced the monstrous rage, Ted dropped onto the ancient area rug and hugged an old wooden baseball bat that he had found in the corner. What he had done with Randall was wrong. He wasn't proud of his actions, and if he was honest, he was glad to be away from Randall's influences. But he wished that he'd had a say. He wished that he could express his real thoughts to his father about the situation. But Dad would never listen, not to him, not to his mother, not to anyone. In his eyes, he was always right, and that's all there was to it. In one last act of defiance, Ted lifted the bat and smacked the floor with it. The solid crack of wood against thin carpet startled him, and the sound of his mother's call of concern brought Ted back to the here and now. "I just dropped something, Mom. Everything's okay. I'm going to bed soon." He hoped his voice didn't betray that he'd been crying. As much as he'd enjoyed his mother's company earlier, he didn't relish the idea of her joining him right now. "Tomorrow's another day," he mumbled to himself before standing. "Be patient with him, Ted." That whisper, did he really hear that? Or was it in his head? Was someone really sharing the attic with him? That's the second time he'd heard this whisper. As if in reply, the top drawer of the old dresser in the corner jarred open. Not in a forced way, but rather in a belated fashion, as if it had been on the verge of opening for a long time. Ted cautiously approached the piece of furniture, belatedly realizing that he'd left the bat behind, but there was no reason for protection. Once again, there was no one in the room with him, but that eerie voice, and it was gone now. At this point in the story, Ted gets curious about his surroundings, and he goes over to a dresser against the wall and opens the drawer that had jarred open a little bit, and he reached down and he picked up a worn leather wallet that he found in there earlier. And in that wallet, there was a piece of paper that it was folded and flattened so hard that it was just creased, and it was yellow. And he knew that there was something written on it, but he hadn't read it yet. So he decided to do that now. Trying not to tremble and tear the delicate paper, Ted hesitated before carefully, oh so carefully, unfolding each and every portion of the divided paper. It wasn't exactly brittle, but it was close. Fortunately, the writing was in ink, but even with the dark blue tint, the words had become faint and in some places nearly invisible. With the help of the tiny flashlight on the end of his Swiss Army knife, Ted was able to discern most of the message, and this is what the message said. My grandfather has always had a penchant for telling stories, long, far-fetched tales involving crazily named people and fantastical events. He could make a simple task sound extravagant and fun. The one that got away was always bigger than the last one that got away. A trek to a local football game became the game that ends all games, and not just because the home team won miraculously in the last seconds of the game, but due to the fact that the second-string quarterback punted the final game-winning points with a broken foot that he had suffered the day before after falling out of a tree to save his grandmother's kitten from being buzzard food when she climbed, the kitten, not the grandmother, too close to said vulture's nest and couldn't get down. His stories were huge, but they still held certain believability in their very enchantment. And this is my dad, because his stories are enormous. And this is the story that he has told me over and over and over again. My grandfather owned and operated the only dry cleaning business in the county and was known as a businessman of wide interests. During the summer months when school was not in session, he would hightail himself to the Universal Dry Cleaners to listen to the often inappropriate but always entertaining tales relayed about the current doings at the courthouse or the ranting of the high school principal on the morals of the day's youth. It was at the Universal Dry Cleaners that he learned of the underhanded escapades of the local law enforcement and the heroism of the county soldiers fighting overseas during World War II. As I busied myself counting wire clothes hangers and sweeping up dust bunnies, I silently hung on every snippet of news and gossip that filtered through the steamy rooms of the establishment. I learned how to play pinochle and listened as the Methodist minister's wife sobbed onto the shoulder of the minister's illicit mistress about her fear that the dear Reverend may have fallen prey to the temptations of Buster Coltrane's moonshine still that everyone knew about but ignored, even though the exact location of said still was public knowledge. For a small town, the stories he heard painted a picture of a larger existence. So my granddad never had to dream of a future adventure. He lived it every day, vicariously through the words of Ellison's elite citizens. So it was at the Universal Dry Cleaners that I learned about the legendary Boston Red Sox player Ted Williams coming to town. This was major news. A sports hero was set to visit Ellison in order to grouse hunt with the team's owner's cousin, whose family was a lifelong resident, my grandfather, the local dentist, the town undertaker, and an assortment of other prominent citizens. I could hardly believe it. And there was no way I planned to miss it, even without an official invitation, even though I was only 8 years old and not yet strong enough to hold a hunting gun. Ted Williams was coming to town, and I was going to be there. I actually had the honor of contacting the real Ted Williams' daughter and only living relative, Claudia, who lives in Florida. And she pretty much gave this book seal of approval, even though it's not necessarily about her dad. But I did a lot of research into the baseball player before putting this book together. Claudia is a nurse. And as I said, she is the only living relative of the Ted Williams. So I'm tickled to death that she has a copy of the book and that I got to make that connection with a real life hero's daughter. And Claudia also wrote a book about her dad.
Lisa,
Yes.
this quote that you got from Claudia is amazing. Would you like to read that for the people?
Yes. Claudia Williams said, Ted Williams did not miss an opportunity to stand up for what was right. And I thoroughly believe, after reading so much about her dad, that it's so true. He was a World War II pilot. He loved to fish. He loved to hunt. And he loved to play baseball.
Yeah, it's a tremendous book, and it's very timely at this point in our society because of the pandemic. Everybody's been moving. There's been a huge exodus from the cities, and this is one of the hardest things that a child goes through.
Yes.
Have you had a personal moving experience similar to this?
Yes, actually, I grew up moving constantly. My dad is a retired golf professional, and I lived on golf courses all my life. And I've lived on 3.
That's so fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it sounds exotic and wonderful, and it sounds like I'm wealthy. In fact, the last golf course we lived on was here in Marion County, West Virginia. And I didn't know until I graduated from college that my high school friends thought that I owned the golf course.
Oh, that's funny.
And we were not wealthy.
I imagine that's a tough life too. But I think the story, the day Ted Williams came to town, perfectly reflects the majority of people who are moving right now, because they're moving from the city to the country because people are working virtually and probably will remain working virtually for a lot of people. So there is a shift in our society, and I think your book speaks very well to that.
Thank you.
I know that you are one of the hardest working writers, authors I have. I mean, Lisa is always trying to improve her craft. would you like to maybe give some first-time authors some tips on how to get started, how to do their research, and just generally comment to that, please?
Actually, this is very, very timely too, because coming up is the month of November, and that is National Novel Writing Month. If you're unfamiliar with NaNoWriMo, any writer, anyone interested in writing, this is the perfect time to get your foot in the door. Get on nanowrimo.org and read about the National Novel Writing Month movement. And the wonderful thing about NaNoWriMo is that nobody sees your writing unless you want them to. It's all you. The premise is that you write 50,000 words in 30 days. I've done this for 11 years. The first 2 years, I didn't make 50,000 words in 30 days. The third year, I did, but I think I cheated a little bit. Nobody knew that but me, because nobody cares but me. And then after that, I actually published a book as a result of NaNoWriMo. It's just a wonderful writing experience. And right now I'm teaching a class of young adults, homeschooled young adults. And we are starting there's a youth program, a youth writers program in NaNoWriMo. And we are doing that starting November 1st.
That's terrific. What a great program
for
that age kids.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
I think the toughest part that I've heard from every author is you just have to start it. You got to sit down. You have to write no matter what comes out of the pen.
Absolutely. And the best way to do that is to keep a journal, write in a diary.
That's a good idea too. Yeah. It really is. Lisa has other books out. She writes fiction and nonfiction. Please tell us about your I Have MS, What's Your Superpower, and your Abby series too, briefly.
I'm looking at my bookshelf, seeing if I have a copy of those close. I wrote I Have MS, What's Your Superpower years after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis on July 1st, 2001, 6 months after the birth of my only child. And I couldn't talk about it. It was just too fresh, too raw. Excuse me while I reach up here for a copy of the book. Which is actually not up there, so never mind. But the way I dealt with being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis is I was teaching at the time. And that year, I taught 8th grade English and creative writing. And that year, as in an attempt to save a teacher from being rifted or moved out of our school, I taught a 7th grade class for the first time ever. And it may sound crazy that 7th and 8th grade aren't anything alike, but they're not. So I needed a different curriculum. So I wrote my own. And every Friday, I would tell my 7th graders, we're going to write in our journals and we're going to share what we write. And then I would incorporate that discussion into the next week's grammar lessons. So we would edit one another's work, proofread and do all that. Of course, no names were shared, so it was all, hush hush. But about 3 weeks into this project, one of my students, James, dared me, said, "Hey, Miss McCombs, we share everything with you, but you're not sharing with us. But I see you writing. You write when we write." I said, "You know what? You're right, James." So I shared what I had been writing. I've been playing around with a story about Abby. So I started reading this, and every Friday when we shared our journal writing, I shared also, and they would give me homework. These 7th graders were precocious. They would give me homework. I want 30 pages by next week, or I want this, or I want that. And I thought, how dare them? But by the end of the school year, I had a manuscript. And they had edited and proofread this entire manuscript. So I told them, and I had already contacted somebody to help me publish it, but I told the students, I said, come September, when you come back to school, because I knew I would have them again. I was the only 8th grade teacher in the school. So I knew I would have that class again. So come September, I might have a surprise for you. And when September rolled around, I met them at the door with a big box of published novels, Abby, and dedicated the book to them.
What a great exercise
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
classroom.
But this was kind of my outlet for being diagnosed with MS too, because Abby's mom has multiple sclerosis. And that just kind of opened the door and allowed me to talk about it. But then they dared me when they were eighth graders. They said, I bet you can't do it again. So we wrote together as 8th graders, Abby's year in 8th grade. Abby was in 7th grade in the book Abby. In Raspberry Beret, she's in 8th grade. And then in Opening Pandora's Box, she's in high school. And by then, that class was in high school. And James came back to me in the middle of his freshman year in high school and said, hey, I need a project. You need to write another book. I said, how does that help you? He said, well, my teacher said that I would get credit for editing your next book. Opening Pandora's Box is the 3rd in the Abby series. And as I was saying, James came to me, my student James came to me and said, I need a project. My English teacher is going to give me credit for editing something that you wrote. And I'll be darned, he spent the entire summer with me reading, proofreading, editing, and giving me advice, because these kids gave me a lot of advice on how that age group thinks. So I owe that group of 7th graders a tremendous amount of thanks and gratitude. So I have published these 3 books on my own. This is all self-publishing. And then the Church of Go series, Kathy and Headline Books took care of me. And Ashley had designed my book covers, and I love my Headline family.
Oh, we love you too, Lisa. So before we sign off, are you working on anything new that you would like to talk about? Maybe projects?
Actually, I'm working on a project right now that is taking minor characters from the Church of Go series. And I'm doing what I call bios and backgrounds. They're just Kindle publications because they're under 100 pages long. And you can find those on Amazon Kindle. I so far have published the first one, is named Sheila, and she was actually a character from the Abby books. But I'll be publishing Maggie Mae Myers next. She is a character from Praise Petals.
How awesome. You just do so many different things at one time. That's why we love you so much.
I know, I'm just busy.
So how can folks get in touch with you if they maybe want to send you an email? If anybody out there thinks of a question later, maybe? Yeah,
get in contact with me at Lisa Annette McCombs at yahoo.com. That's LISAANNETTEMCCOMBS at yahoo.com. I also blog on Medium. So you can just type in Medium and it will take you to the sites at Medium. My website, I'm working on a new one, but right now you can go to ladywiththecane.com.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, if anybody, like I said, has questions out there, she gave you her contact information. So please feel free to reach out to her. And from all of us here at Zoom Into Books, Lisa, I want to thank you and thank you all for joining us today. If you missed the beginning, the replay is available on the Zoom Into Books Facebook page, and it will also be up on the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. Awesome. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. So again, Lisa, thank you so much. It was great to see you. Hopefully we'll get to see each other in person sooner rather than later.
Bye, Ashley. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.